What's happening, guys? Techstores. Welcome back to another build on the channel. Hope you guys are doing well and staying safe out there. How many of you have actually forgotten about this build? I've started this over a month ago. This is the micro-atx water cool system that we're building in the Corsair Crystal 280X. If you guys haven't seen part one, pause this video and go check that out. That way you're all caught up and you can see how we got to this point. But pretty much we're gonna be continuing where we left off. Half the build is pretty much already done. The only thing left to do is plan the loop, do the bends, fill it with coolant, and the benchmarks, of course. This is the first ever micro-atx water cool system I've done ever in my life, so I'm really excited to see how this is gonna look at the end. So yeah, with that said, let's get started. So all the fittings have arrived from Corsair. We are sticking with the Hydro X series, but take a look at what tubes we're gonna be using for the build, you guys. Hardline frosted tubing. It's gonna look so sick inside the build. I'm kind of tired of using the clear acrylic and PETG tubing all the time, so I thought I would change it up and go with something different. I haven't decided if I'm gonna go with solid coolant just yet. I think honestly it will look a lot better with the frosted tube, but we'll figure that out once all the bends are done. Also, this is one of the reasons why I had to postpone this build for a month, you guys. It's because I was waiting for these fittings to arrive from Taiwan. If you haven't heard of the Bits Power X cross fittings, then I'm gonna blow your mind. This is gonna be a game changer for all water cooled systems, and I'll show you guys what I'm talking about. I wish these existed years ago, you guys. It would have made my life so much easier building water cooled systems. It would have made everyone's life so much easier. But I'm gonna show you guys what's so special about these. And honestly, if you're a water cooling enthusiast, you probably heard of these before, but you haven't, and you are planning on doing a water cool system, I can guarantee you, you're gonna be buying these. They come in white, silver, and I think black as well. But here's why these are so amazing. So let's say, just as an example, I'm gonna install a fitting on the first port of the GPU block, right? Now, just for the sake of the video, let's say you wanna do a run from the GPU block to the CPU block. Obviously that's not recommended, but let's say you wanna do a straight run from here straight to this port. Well, if you look closely, it's not really perfectly aligned from the port down to the GPU block. As you guys can see, it's off by maybe a few millimeters, maybe a centimeter. It's not perfectly straight. And now here's where the fitting comes in handy. You can actually rotate this top cap over here until it is perfectly aligned with the port. How cool is that? So let's say if I'm gonna take the tube now, look at that. Straight path into the fitting. That is perfect. This is gonna help a lot when it comes to planning your loop, and your bends and your tube runs are gonna be a lot cleaner because you kind of have more flexibility on adjusting the fitting. That way it aligns perfectly with your tube runs. All right, so I've decided on my loop pattern. The inlet on the CPU block is on the right, and then the outlet is on the left. So we'll start from the left. We're gonna go out from the CPU block into the top rad down to the GPU block into the bottom rad straight in the back to the pump and reservoir combo, and then from the back out, back inside the CPU block. All right, so we're gonna start off from the first path from the CPU block to the top rad, and here's actually a perfect example of where the X-Cross fitting is gonna help me out here. So I don't know if you guys can see that, but if I didn't install the X-Cross fitting and I run the tube straight down, it would have come in contact with this heatsink cover over here. So the fact that I installed the fitting over here, I was able to offset it a couple millimeters towards the front of the PC. And now I can run the tube straight down and then make the bend over here into the inlet port of the CPU block. All right, so now that I know my first bend is from the CPU block to the top rad, it's time to start the bending and cutting process. Now, since we're using acrylic frosted tubes, I can't use a regular tube cutter, otherwise it's gonna shatter. So I'm gonna bust out the Dremel for this. All right, so now that we cut the tube, it's time to smoothen out the edges. That way it sits flush inside the fitting, and also it doesn't damage the seal. So what I like to do to save time is use this all-in-one reamer. I hook it up to my drill, and what this does is it pretty much smoothens out the inner and the outer diameter of the tube. Oh yeah, look at that. Smoother than a baby's butt cheeks. All right, so what I'm gonna do next is a 90-degree bend on the tube. That way I can have the tube run straight down with a 90-degree bend into the fitting for the CPU block. All right, so to bend any hardline tube, you will need a silicone insert with the appropriate size for your inner diameter. This is pretty much to keep the tube from collapsing as you're doing the bending process, and I'll show you guys what that looks like. So basically what I'm doing here is I'm heating up the tube evenly. Think of it like a rotisserie chicken. You gotta make sure the chicken is warmed up evenly all around, right? That's basically the same idea here. I'm moving the tube side to side and I'm rotating the tube slightly once I get back to the starting position. I'm trying to keep the heat focused on a small area of the tube, probably around 2 to 3 inches. That's all you need for the tube to bend. You don't want to keep the tube that close to the heat gun, otherwise it will get hot too quickly and begin forming bubbles. But at the same time, you don't want to keep it too far away, otherwise it's going to take longer to reach the bending point. So when you start bending the tube, now this is how I do it. I continue the heating process until I start to notice the tube bending by itself. I will never force the tube to bend. I like to let gravity do the job for me. As soon as I notice the tube bending quite a bit just from rotating, that's when I know it's getting close. So at this point, I grab the other edge of the tube and I start flipping it instead of rotating it, since it's now developing an angle. As I'm focusing on the bending area for a few seconds, I flip to the other side and I rinse and repeat this process until the bending process becomes effortless. The tube should be warm enough that it starts bending easily just by touching it. You should never use any force to bend the tubes whatsoever. Once you bend it to your desired angle, you can use a bending kit to ensure you have the perfect angle needed for your loop. In my case, I'm doing a perfect 90-degree angle, and I'm actually using the one that I built myself from a few pieces of wood. At this point, you have to wait for the tube to cool down a little bit so it maintains its angle. What I like to do is blow on it a little bit to help speed the process. And there you have it, a perfect 90-degree bend. All right, so we're gonna grab our hardline fitting and remove the top cap. Make sure we don't lose the seal, this is very important. And then the edge with the thread is gonna go inside the X-cross fitting up top. All right, now it's time for the most tedious part of building a water-cooled system, the measurements. We have to find out how much to cut off from both sides of the tube. That way it aligns perfectly between both of the fittings. So as you guys can see, this one is a bit too long. It passes the outlet port on the CPU block. So we're gonna have to cut about maybe an inch off the top. That way it aligns perfectly with the fitting. All right, so I got my first bend done. It's actually a double bend, and this is gonna essentially sit in this fitting, and it's gonna go straight up there to the top radiator. All right, so I'm gonna put the cap back on there first. Same thing for the other end as well. So here's the cap and the seal. All right, now we are ready to add our first bend inside the loop. That was a pretty tight fit, I am not gonna lie. I'm actually surprised that I was able to do this in the first run. This is actually the second hardest run in this entire build just because of how tight this bend has to be in order to reach the top radiator. The hardest run is gonna be from the inlet to the back of the PC where the pump and reservoir is. So we're gonna save that for the end. So this next one's gonna be really easy. We're basically doing a straight tube down with a 90-degree bend into a 90-degree fitting. So let's hook this up to the GPU block. Oops. So let's hook this up to the GPU block. All right. So our second tube is ready to go, but unfortunately I had to use a few 90-degree adapters and a 7.0mm extension in order to align this perfectly. Otherwise, it wasn't gonna work. All right, another perfect 90-degree bend. We are making some pretty good progress. This is the second run I've done on the first try. So, knock on wood that my lucky streak continues. There was one thing I had to switch, and that was the RGB strip that was on this side. Unfortunately, I had to move it on the opposite because it just didn't look that good next to this tube. It was way too close. So now we have one on the top and one on this side, which I think will look a lot better. All right, so the next one we're gonna do is out the GPU block and in the bottom radiator. So let's start this off with a 90-degree adapter. That way we have a straight tube run from here, and then we could do a 90-degree bend straight down to the radiator. So check this out, guys. If I put the tube on here just to see the path towards the radiator, you can see that it's gonna be off a few millimeters, which means the X-cross fitting is gonna come to the rescue once again. So I'm gonna hook this up to the radiator, and I'm gonna rotate the fitting so that it's more towards the case. And now it's gonna align perfectly. You guys can't really see here, but you'll see once the bend is done. Oh my God, look how straight this tube is, you guys. It is straighter than I am. I am absolutely loving these X-cross fittings. They are such a game changer. Probably the best invention ever when it comes to water cool systems, to be honest. But perfectly aligned, straight into the radiator. No extra extensions were needed or adapters. Beautiful. So I want to take this tube out just so I can have easy access for the port in the back, because the next run is going to be from the bottom rad to the back of the case with the pump and res combo. This is pretty much how I want the run to go. From the bottom rad through the cable grommet and out the back. And here's what the back of the case looks like currently. It kind of looks like if someone stuck a combat knife in someone's stomach and gutted the person out, but this will all be managed at the end of the video. Here's the pump and res combo that I am talking about. So this has to be mounted somewhere in the back of the case. That way it doesn't move, obviously, but also it has to align perfectly with the tube runs, and it has to make the draining and fielding process a lot easier. Unfortunately, this does not come with a drain valve, so I'm gonna have to put one somewhere near the bottom of the case, because that's where you want your drain valve typically, on the lowest part of your loop. You got your fill port on the top, your temperature sensor on the bottom, and then both your inlet ports and then your outlet ports on the left side.
1 hour later.
So I figured out the best possible location for the pump res. I'll be drilling a hole from the side to hold the pump and res kind of somewhere in this area. And then to fill up the system, I'm actually going to drill a hole inside the top of the case and install this fill port and run a tube straight down to the top port of the pump and res. And of course, I'll install a drain valve somewhere on the bottom. But the best part about all this is that you're not going to see any of the holes drilled, because it's going to be covered by the case covers. All right, so now that I know where the pump is and where exactly the in and out ports are, I can finally continue finishing up the runs. All right, so in order to figure out how big I need to drill the hole from the top, I'm gonna insert this fitting in here and measure it from the bottom. I'm gonna go ahead and tilt the PC down just so it's a lot easier to do this. So this is pretty much what it's gonna look like. We got the tube going from the top of the case straight down to the fill port of the pump and res. So I'm gonna take my pencil and just kind of outline the top fitting over here to give you an idea of how big the hole needs to be for the case. So this is the tool we're going to be using to drill a hole in the top of the case. Now the goal is to match the width of the threaded portion of the fill port. So this is actually pretty damn close. We're at 3/4 of an inch, and obviously you don't want to go anything wider than that because you want this raised edge over here to kind of sit on top of the case, and you can lock the fill port from the bottom. You'll see exactly what I'm talking about. All right, so obviously I'm not going to drill the hole from the inside of the case because all my components are in here, all my cables are here, and I don't want the shavings to go inside them and potentially damage my components. So what I'm going to do is I mark the center of the circle, and I'm going to drill a tiny little hole inside just so I can use it as a reference point to drill the actual hole from the top side of the case. All right, so now that we have our center point of the fill port, we can proceed to cut out the hole from the top. All right, so the hole is drilled and the fill port slides right in so easily. Look at that. No lube required. And I'm going to use the nut to lock it in place from the bottom. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, your dedicated fill port from the top of the case. Beautiful. All right, so the fill port has been successfully installed. So when it comes time for maintenance, all I gotta do is remove the plug and start filling in the system with coolant. After I'm done, I can plug it up and put the top cover on, and it's hidden. That's the cool part about the placement of the fill port. So I also went ahead and kind of finished up the back end over here. Man, this took me literally half the day. There's a lot going on here, and this is proven to be the hardest water cool system I have done so far on the channel. You know, there's only so much I could work with given the space limitations of the case, especially if I'm fitting a pump and res combo in the back. But you know, given the circumstance, I'm actually super satisfied with how everything turned out here in the back. And I'm still not done yet. You know, I did my best to kind of use some Velcro straps to tie the cables up here. There's still some cables to work on, obviously, but I could have made my life a lot easier if I went with soft tubing, but you know, for some reason I just kind of wanted to keep it consistent throughout the build. Even though we're not going to see pretty much any of this once the system is built, I kind of wanted to stick with the hardline tube just for consistency, and of course my LCD wouldn't allow it. So let me guide you guys on what's going on back here, starting with the drain valve. This was the best placement I could find back here without making the entire back more messy. So I went with these low profile twist valves instead of the handle ones because these pretty much fit anywhere and they are more convenient in my opinion. So when I'm ready to drain the system, all I gotta do is remove the plug, insert a soft line fitting with a soft tube, and then come up here and just twist this handle over here to the on position and begin draining out the coolant. Afterwards, when I'm done, I would plug it up and then rotate this back to the off position. Pretty simple. Now for the actual loop, we do have the bottom rad coming through the grommet to a 90-degree adapter straight up into the pump and res, and then out from this end back inside the case to the CPU block. So ladies and gentlemen, here is what the build is looking like so far. Oh my god, that is looking so clean. I think I'm in love. I swear, I feel like the harder the build is for me, the more satisfying it is at the end when I complete it. I am absolutely loving this build. It took me 3 days to get to this point, and we're still not done because we got to clean the system and then pour in the fresh coolant. So it's about a 4-day project, and it was worth every minute of it. All right, so next thing to do is prep the system before pouring in distilled water. We're going to be using the Primo Chill Primo Prep, and this is pretty much going to clean the blocks, the radiators, any gunk or debris or dirt left inside them, and it's going to flush it all out before I can pour in fresh distilled water. So earlier in the video, I was actually thinking about going with a solid color, which I think will look really awesome with the frosted tubes, but because we don't have any specific colors going on in the system, I think we're gonna just stick with distilled water. I mean, it's looking really awesome as it is, and it's not even on with any lighting. So I think distilled water in the frosted tubes is going to look just as good. All right, so before we even pour any type of liquid in here, we gotta check for leaks, right? We don't want any liquid leaking onto our parts and potentially damaging them. So obviously this is during COVID time, so paper towels are going to be very scarce. Normally back in the Stone Ages, we would put paper towels underneath the fittings and the blocks to make sure it catches any type of liquid that drips. But I'm gonna show you guys a much easier and safer way of checking for leaks in your loop. So we're gonna be using the EK leak tester kit. I'm sure you guys have heard me talk about this so many times in previous videos, but I cannot recommend this enough. This is a lifesaver. Essentially what this does is it's going to fill in your system with air instead of liquid, and we can determine if there's a leak present before we can start pouring in liquid. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna hook this up to my fill port because that is the most convenient port in my loop. I'm gonna rotate this until it's fully tightened and make sure your drain valve is closed. All right, and then we're gonna start pumping air inside the system until the meter reaches between the green and the red area. All right, once it reaches that, we're gonna lock the valve, and then we're gonna leave this alone and come back in 15 minutes to check and see where exactly the hand lands. If it stays in the green area, that means there are no leaks in your system. All right, so 20 minutes later, and we are still in the green zone. It looks like it only went down one line. So, if you guys do the same test and yours goes down a little bit, that's fine, that's completely normal. As long as it's still in the green range, you are good to go. So now I have peace of mind that the system is not going to leak, and I can start pouring in the distilled water. All right, so we're gonna pour this entire thing into 32 ounces of distilled water. And then I'm gonna bring out my spare power supply to give power just to the pump. I don't wanna turn on the entire system. So basically what I'm gonna do is hook up the power supply jumper to the 24 pin. This is going to trick the power supply into thinking that it's hooked up to an entire motherboard. And then I'm gonna hook up the pump to the Molex connector. That's it. This is all you need to give power to your pump. And then I'm gonna use a fill bottle to slowly fill the pump and res with the liquid. So there we go. All right, so once it's almost topped off, we're gonna turn on the power supply and let the pump kind of push through some of the liquid through the system. So as soon as the liquid gets to this point, I'm gonna shut off the power supply and top it off again because you don't want the pump running dry, otherwise you can run the risk of damaging it. So here we go, I'm gonna turn on the power supply, let the pump do its thing, and shut it off. Wow, that actually went by pretty quick. I'm gonna go and fill it up again, and do the exact same thing. I'm not gonna even check for leaks because that's how confident I am in the leak tester kit. All right, so the reservoir is fully topped off and we can see the liquid going through the entire loop. It says to leave the system on for 72 hours. So obviously I'm not gonna do that. It's gonna take another 3 days. So what I'm gonna do is finish up the cable management in the back, turn the system on, and show you guys what it looks like when it's finally complete. All right, so in terms of performance, we are looking at a 4.4 gigahertz overclock on the 3800X running at 1.3 volts. In terms of temperatures, the PC's been running for about 30 minutes or so on the Heaven benchmark, and we are getting under 70 degrees Celsius for the CPU and a little under 55 degrees for the GPU, which is actually pretty good. The 5700 XT with the stock cooler runs 90 to 95 degrees Celsius, guys, on full load, which is ridiculously hot. So the fact that we're getting a little less than half the temps underwater is actually pretty damn cool. And this is how the PC sounds like under full load. You can kind of hear the pump noise from the back, but there is no noise coming from the fans. I think they're actually running on the lowest setting as of now. So overall, very silent build. I said it before and I will say it again, damn, she be looking fine. Man, what a relief it is to finally finish this thing. 4 full days, you guys, to complete this. This is definitely the hardest build I have done so far to date on the channel, and I loved every second of it because, I don't really get challenged anymore when building PCs. So when I take on a project this epic that really does push me to my limits, I enjoy every second of it. And when it's finally done, I get this sense of satisfaction. But overall, I am super happy with the way the build turned out. I think I got a little lucky getting all the bends done correctly the first time around without any leaks, so that's always awesome. The X-Cross fittings from Bits Power definitely were the MVP here. Without them, I feel like my tubing would have looked horrible, to be honest. Oh, I also want to give huge thanks to Performance PCs for sending out these fittings last minute to get the build done. If you guys are ever looking for any water cooling parts, check them out. They pretty much have everything available for your water cooling needs. I'll drop a link to it down below. So while I was working on the cable management on the back, I was kind of regretting going with a full-size power supply. I feel like a smaller SFX power supply would have given me more room to work with, but in the end, I pulled through. I spent a full hour finding the best possible route for each cable, and given the space limitations, plus the fact that I fit in a pump and res back here, I think I did a really good job. I used a lot of Velcro and cable clips to help with the routing, and overall pretty satisfied with it while still having a clean access to the drain valve near the bottom, which was really important. I also peeled off the upside down Corsair logo from the bottom radiator using a heat gun, and I placed the RGB strip back in the rear to kind of balance the lighting a lot better. And of course, I can't forget about the frost tubing. There isn't any solid color in them and it still looks badass. I just love how the RGB lighting illuminates through them and kind of bounces off the tubes. It makes the entire build look sick, and moving forward, I'm definitely going to be using more of these frosted tubes in my water cooling builds. I've actually decided I'm going to be using frosted tubes for Big Red version 4 later this year. It's going to be epic. But yeah, that's pretty much it for the video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you want to see more small form factor water cool builds on the channel, consider dropping a like and subscribe for more awesome builds coming your way very soon. I'll drop a link to everything I used in the build down below. Of course, I love you beautiful, beautiful nostrils, and I'll see you very soon in the next one.